I was asked to give a short keynote on the hydrogen quality issue from the perspective of a gas infrastructure operator, and as OGE is maybe known to you, is one of Germany's largest transmission system operator. And for that reason, we were dealing with the issue, what would be the hydrogen quality in repurposed pipelines or in repurposed gas infrastructure. And when you're coming to deal with that issue, you will surely notice that you can, via the value chain, have three different segments. First of all, there's the upstream, there's the production of hydrogen. The second is the midstream, which comprises the transmission, the storage, and the distribution. And at the very end, there's the utilization of hydrogen as an energy carrier or a gaseous fuel. And the question is, can the requirements of the end use be met along this value chain? First of all, when we're looking at the upstream part, the generation processes for hydrogen can be quite different. We're knowing electrolysis for sure, the chlor-alkali process, which is an industrial process which is used in large scale, as well as steam reforming. The last few years, more or less, the pyrolysis systems came to the market for generating hydrogen. And all these generating processes have their advantages, disadvantages, have their own set of impurities and components that may be within that hydrogen. There are different purities of hydrogen that can be reached via the different techniques without purification, maybe with further purification. And I've just plotted here some of the most common molecules that can be found as a trace component within the hydrogen with respect to its generation path. And all of this is more or less quite well known. There are lots of processes known for purification, so that the question of hydrogen quality with respect to the upstream can say is solved. The second thing is the downstream. The applications can differ. We know lots of fuel cell applications, especially for hydrogen mobility, for instance. Lots of end users think about just combusting the hydrogen for heat generation. Hydrogen is used as a feedstock on many occasions. Steel production is a big part. And all these different applications have their own requirements. Lots of them talk about high purity of the hydrogen. And I've depicted here the ISO 14687 standard, where I'm sure that all of you know what the requirements are that are stated there. Others, for instance, like combustion purposes, say we can live with a lesser degree of purity on hydrogen. Other end users say we don't care so much about the purity itself. For us, it's just important that there is an absence of certain impurities, like sulfur, for instance, when thinking of catalysis. Others can barely deal with water. And third parties are also there that say the quality itself isn't the big matter. The big deal is that it's not that the variation of the hydrogen quality is not too big. And all these different requirements are also quite well known at the time being, so that the part what is left is the midstream. Transport of the gas via repurposed natural gas pipelines, the storage in geological storages like caverns or aquifers, the distribution via the DSO nets. All of these parts of the midstream sector comprise their own special contaminants or trace components that can diffuse into the hydrogen. We know, for instance, that at the storage sites for drying the gas, natural gas, maybe in future times hydrogen, we use every now and then triethylene glycol as a drying agent. And this triethylene glycol can be found in the end in the gas infrastructure, as well as depicted here in the lower right corner, tetrahydrothiophene as an odorant used in the DSO scripts. And as there is at the time being no real setup of pipelines from the existing gas infrastructure that has been used with hydrogen as a gas, we have a lack of experience what the kind of what the amount of concentration of these impurities introduced to the hydrogen will be. So we have to put a question mark on that. What would be the influence of the existing infrastructure when repurposing the existing natural gas pipelines for hydrogen transport? And what can you do when you know less about a certain issue? We did some research. That is something that we did in Germany. We had just a very little setup of a pipeline segment that was used to transport natural gas over decades. And we took a segment of that pipeline. We cleaned, first of all, the inner surface. And it had then been closed at the end and the beginning of this segment. So we got a container of roughly 240 liters. We applied a pressure of about 70 bars, and we introduced hydrogen with a high purity of 5.0. And we then subsequently introduced the typical, what I call it now, the midstream contaminants to that pipeline segment. Waited for a fortnight and took a sample. Introduced a second contaminant, waited a fortnight, took another sample. And by this procedure, we introduced more and more of the typical contaminants. And with a quite sophisticated analysis of the gaseous phase, we were able to check within that hydrogen for trace components. And the outcomes, the findings were quite interesting. I've just depict here some of the charts of the results that we found within the research project. And it was we surely could notice that a plurality of different components that we introduced within that pipeline segment were to be found in the gaseous phase in the end. Hydrocarbons of the lower and mid-boiling range, water, for instance, and other components. And from all this knowledge, from that experiment, we said, okay, then with the idea of what can be possible within a repurposed pipeline, we set a table of limiting values. We did that in Germany, and we said there are 3 types of contaminants that we have to take into account. The green ones are the ones that we must attribute to the generation process. That are the yellow ones are the ones that we will have ubiquitarily everywhere, water, oxygen, and the red ones that are coming from the natural gas infrastructure. And with this set of limiting values, which were derived from our experiments, we've gone to the international standardization. We've gone to the CEN TC234, which is dealing with the gas infrastructure, and came up with a new work item. The same thing was done by the EasyGas group. And this is now under preparation, being a technical specification for the quality of hydrogen within converted or relocated gas systems. We know that in most cases, hydrogen quality will be higher than 98%, what we set as a minimum requirement. And we surely know that this is something like a transition phase, that will be foreseeable, that there will be stricter values in future times. But that is at the time being the best what we know, what in the future days, the analysis and the metrology of hydrogen, at least in rededicated gas infrastructure, has to cope with or to deal with. That were a few slides that I just wanted to show you. Thanks for joining. And if there are questions, feel free to contact me.